Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves drifting through the velvet-draped halls of an ancient manor, where the candlelight flickers against tapestries that tell stories far more beautiful than anything that ever actually happened. You are walking through a dreamscape of polished marble and whispered secrets, where every shadow seems to hide a truth too heavy to bear. The air is thick with the scent of old lavender and wood smoke, wrapping around you like a heavy wool cloak as you wander through this labyrinth of magnificent deceptions. It feels safe here, in the warmth of these grand illusions, but there is a chill beneath the surface that you might not notice until it is too late. You probably won't survive this much honesty without losing your sense of comfort first, but let us see if we can weather the storm together. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, feel free to leave a comment telling us where in the world you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the globe. Imagine, if you will, that you are standing in the center of an old, grand library, much like the ones found in the great houses of olden times. The ceiling stretches upward into darkness, lost in a swirl of carved oak and gilded molding, while the floor beneath your feet is a checkerboard of cool stone and warm wood. You move through the aisles with the grace of a phantom, your fingers brushing against the leather spines of books that contain centuries of human ambition, greed, and glory. In this moment, everything feels perfect. The stories told within these covers are grand enough to make your heart swell with a sense of importance. They speak of heroes who never bled and kings who were more divine than mortal, and you find yourself breathing in the sweet, heady perfume of these legendary tales. The golden light from the chandeliers spills across the floor, casting long dancing shadows that seem to whisper the very lies they represent. You have always loved these stories, the way they make the world feel larger, more meaningful, and more purposeful than it truly is. There is a certain comfort in the grandeur of an epic, even when you know deep down that the knights were but men with rusted mail and the queens were but women with tired eyes. But for now, you allow yourself to believe in the magic, letting the mythos wash over you like a warm summer rain. You are lost in the splendor of the lie, finding solace in the magnificent architecture of a history written by those who wish to be remembered as gods. As you walk, the sound of your footsteps is muffled by the thick, ornate rugs that line the corridors. Each step feels like an immersion into another era, a time when honor was a matter of blood and truth was whatever the scribe wrote on fine vellum. You feel the weight of your own clothing, the heavy velvet, the lace, the structured layers, as if the very fabric is meant to hold you in place within this beautiful, fabricated reality. It is easy to forget that these walls were built by hands that trembled, and that these floors have been polished by feet that wandered in confusion. To you, they are merely the stage for a grand drama where everything is certain and nothing is ever truly lost. You find yourself pausing before a massive window, looking out onto a landscape of rolling hills and mist-shrouded valleys. The view is as much a part of this story as the books themselves. It is a picturesque vista that seems to exist solely for your viewing pleasure. In the distance, the silhouettes of ancient castles stand guard against an eternal sunset, their towers piercing the clouds like needles of stone. You think about how people have always looked at the horizon and seen not just land and sea, but the boundaries of their own imaginations. To live within a lie is to live in a world where every mountain peak is a throne, and every valley is a kingdom waiting to be claimed. In this era of your journey, you are not looking for the cracks. You are celebrating the seamless joinery of the illusion. You lean against a mahogany desk, its surface polished so finely it reflects your own curious gaze back at you with a haunting clarity. The inkwells and quills laid out upon it speak of a time when history was crafted by hand, one careful stroke at a time. There is an allure to the permanence of these stories, the idea that if we write it down beautifully enough, the truth will naturally follow. You find yourself mesmerized by the intricate patterns of the wood grain, seeing in them the much more complex paths of human fate. You consider the nature of a myth, how it provides a structure for our lives, giving us a sense of order when the world feels chaotic. A lie can be a magnificent thing, a grand cathedral built to house the hopes and fears of 1,000 generations. In this hall of shadows, you are not a traveler in a messy, unpredictable world. Perhaps you are a character in an unfolding legend. The stars outside the window seem to align with the constellations of your own thoughts, guiding you through the corridors of your mind. It is a beautiful sort of deception, one that makes the heavy burdens of existence feel light as they are carried by the wings of poetry and prose. As you move deeper into the heart of the matter, you notice how the air grows cooler, more still. The silence here is not empty. It is thick with the echoes of voices, long silenced. You hear the faint rustle of silk or the distant chime of a clock that may no longer even exist in the physical world. This is the atmosphere of the past, where the ghosts of our ancestors linger in the corners of our vision, waiting to tell us their versions of the truth. They speak of glory and conquest, of honor lost and won, wrapping their words in the finest veils of rhetoric. You listen with an open heart, eager to be swept away once again by the grandeur of their impossible lives. But even amidst this splendor, there is a subtle tension, a slight dissonance in the music that plays faintly from some invisible gramophone. It is a beautiful melody, yet it has a minor key that tugs at your spirit, reminding you that nothing can remain perfect forever. You ignore it for now, letting the harmony soothe your soul as you wander through this hall of gilded falsehoods. To live in a lie is to dance with a partner who never tires and whose steps are always perfectly choreographed. It is an effortless existence, a rhythmic movement through a world where the sun never sets and the heroes never fail. You think about the scribes and the kings who crafted these tales to preserve their legacies. They knew that the truth is often messy, much too jagged and uneven to fit neatly into the annals of time. A lie, however, can be smoothed like polished marble. It can be shaped to reflect our own desires for greatness. You feel a kinship with those ancient architects of myth, understanding the impulse to create a world more magnificent than the one we actually inhabit. It is a human instinct to want to live in a legend, to believe that our lives carry the weight of epic poetry. The candlelight flickers as you pass a tall mirror, and for a moment, your reflection seems different, perhaps older, or perhaps more weary than you realized. You gaze at yourself, wondering if you are truly part of this magnificent story, or merely an observer caught in its web. The distinction between the real and the imagined begins to blur in this twilight hour. You find that the beauty of the lie is often its most seductive quality, masking the imperfections of the human condition with a layer of gold leaf. It is much easier to love a beautiful fiction than to wrestle with a plain, difficult truth. As you walk through the next doorway, the shadows lengthen, stretching out like long, dark fingers across the floor. You feel as though you are walking through the very fabric of time itself. The grandeur of the setting is almost overwhelming, making one feel small yet significant all at once. It is a heavy sensation, much like the weight of a crown that was never truly worn. You wonder if those who came before us felt this same sense of awe as they stood amidst their own constructed realities, building empires out of nothing but words and will. The scent of old parchment becomes more pronounced now, mingling with the aroma of beeswax and dried roses. It is a smell that speaks of libraries and studies, of late nights spent by candlelight, as scholars debated the nature of the soul or the movement of the stars. You imagine those scholars, their eyes weary, but their hearts full of the fervor of belief, believing they were uncovering the secrets of the universe when they were merely interpreting the myths they had inherited. There is a quiet tragedy in the idea that we might be building our lives upon foundations that are as ephemeral as smoke. In this moment of stillness, you feel a sense of peace with the deception. It is a comfortable shroud, shielding you from the harshness of the wind and the cold reality of the earth below. You are not ready to leave the warmth of the lie just yet. There is so much more to explore in these halls of illusion. The golden light continues to play upon the walls, creating patterns that look like maps to lost civilizations or ancient lineages of kings. You follow the lines of light as if they were a path, leading you deeper into the heart of this magnificent, beautiful lie. Yet, even as you lean into the comfort, there is a subtle feeling of anticipation, a sense that something is shifting. The air seems to hold its breath, waiting for the first crack to appear in the gilding. You do not know when the truth will arrive, but you can feel it pulse like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. For now, though, you simply exist within this moment, letting the grandeur of the past envelop you as you prepare for the long journey ahead. You are a traveler in time, moving through the beautiful shadows of what was once thought to be absolute truth. As you settle into the quietude of the hall, your thoughts turn to how much effort it takes to maintain such a perfect facade. To keep a lie alive requires constant vigilance. One must ensure that no stray fact or inconvenient reality disrupts the harmony. You realize that this is why people cling so fiercely to their myths. It is an exhausting but beautiful endeavor to hold back the tide of truth. You take a deep breath, letting the heavy air fill your lungs, and prepare yourself for the slow unfolding of what lies ahead in the darkness beyond the light. The transition from the warmth of the hall to the quiet tension of the corridor feels like stepping from one world into another, though you remain within the same structure. The golden light that once seemed so pervasive now seems to be retreating, pulled back by some unseen force toward the corners and the edges of the room. You find yourself watching the way the shadows stretch, longer than they should be, casting elongated shapes that mimic the silhouettes of giants or ancient trees. It is as if the very geometry of the house is beginning to question itself, leaning into a truth that hasn't quite been spoken aloud yet. The air feels thinner here, more brittle, like old parchment that might snap if touched with too much force. As you move forward, you notice how the gold leaf on the moldings seems to catch the light differently, now less like a brilliant sun and more like the glint of something ancient and weathered. You begin to realize that while the story was beautiful, it was also heavy. It carries the weight of its own impossibility. There is a slight tremor in your perception, a subtle realization that the perfection you admired might be a carefully constructed veil. It is a strange sensation, much like walking on ice that looks solid but holds a hidden depth of fluid uncertainty beneath your feet. You wonder if the people who lived here felt the same creeping doubt as they looked upon their own achievements. The first crack in the gold is not a visible fracture, but a thought, a quiet whisper in the back of your mind that asks, what if it ends quite so it seems? You look at the magnificent portraits hanging on the walls, the faces of ancestors with their stoic expressions and noble brows. They were painted to represent an idealized version of humanity, meant to inspire awe in those who gazed upon them. But as you study their eyes, you begin to see the minute imperfections, the slight asymmetry, the tension held in a jawline, the sadness that no amount of pigment could fully hide. These are not just icons. They are people who lived through the messy, unvarnished realities of life. It is fascinating how a single doubt can act like a hairline fracture on a fine porcelain vase. It doesn't break the object immediately, but it changes the way the light passes through it, creating a distortion that was not there before. You find yourself looking for these cracks now, seeking out the places where the myth meets the reality of human frailty. The grandeur is still there, but it has become something else, a beautiful mask that you are beginning to peer behind. This realization is not an ending, but a beginning. It is the moment when the illusion starts to lose its absolute power over your senses. You walk toward a large, ornate clock that stands in the corner of the room, its pendulum swinging with a rhythmic, heavy thud. The sound is like the heartbeat of history itself, marking the passage of time that eventually wears down even the strongest stone. You realize that the lies we tell are often attempts to stop this clock, to freeze ourselves in a moment of perfection where nothing fades and nothing dies. But the clock keeps ticking, indifferent to our desire for permanence. It is an unrelenting truth that mocks the static nature of the legends we build to protect ourselves from the passage of years. The silence between the ticks of the clock becomes a space for reflection, a hollow echo where your own thoughts begin to wander toward the concept of permanence. You think about how much effort was spent making sure these walls were thick and these halls were grand. It was an effort to defy time, to create something that would stand as a testament to greatness, long after the hands that built it had turned to dust. But even in this magnificent structure, there is the truth of decay, the microscopic peeling of paint, the slow settling of the foundation. The cracks are always there. We just choose when to notice them. As you stand before the clock, you feel a sudden urge to reach out and touch the glass, to see if it is as cold and hard as it appears. Your fingers hover near the surface, sensing the invisible tension between the solid object and the air around it. The lie was a seamless coat of armor, but now the seams are becoming visible. You realize that you cannot simply live in the golden era forever. Eventually, every story must face its own truth. This is the first moment of your realization, the realization that the beauty we love often relies on our willingness to ignore the gaps. You consider the nature of those who lived before you, how they might have felt as their world began to shift under the weight of new truths. They likely held onto their illusions with a desperate grip, fearing that if the gold were to peel, they would be left with nothing but the raw stone underneath. It is a human fear, isn't it? To face the truth is to face our own vulnerability, our own mortality, and the frailty of our legacies. Yet, there is something in this realization that feels oddly liberating, as if a heavy cloak has been loosened from your shoulders. The shadows seem to dance more frantically now, responding to the shiftingness of your thoughts. They are no longer just shapes. They are the visual representation of the uncertainty you are beginning to feel. You look back at the path you have walked, and the way the light hits the floor seems different than it did when you first entered. The clarity is coming, not as a blinding flash, but as a gradual sharpening of the senses. You are learning that to truly see the world, one must be willing to look past the luster of the surface. You think about the stories themselves, how they were written to smooth over the rough edges of human history. A king might have been a tyrant in reality, but in the story, he was a just and wise ruler whose reign brought prosperity. By smoothing these edges, we create a more cohesive narrative, but we lose the texture of the truth in the process. You wonder how much of our own lives we have smoothed over to make ourselves more palatable to others or even to ourselves. The first crack is not just in the history books. It is in the very way we perceive our own existence. The atmosphere in the room shifts, becoming a little more somber, but also more profound. It is as if the house itself is waiting for your verdict. Will you cling to the gold, or will you embrace the cracks? You find yourself caught between the two, torn by the desire to keep the beauty while craving the honesty of the truth. The tension is a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest that accompanies the realization that nothing can remain unchanged. It is an unsettling but necessary feeling, the catalyst for the transformation that lies ahead in your journey. You look at the intricate carvings on the clock's wooden casing, seeing how the wood was carved to mimic more complex shapes, vines, leaves, and mythical creatures. The craftsmanship is incredible, yet it is still just a representation of something else. It is an imitation of life, much like the legends we use to describe our own history. You realize that we often mistake the carving for the thing itself, forgetting that the wood was once a living tree, subject to the wind and the rain. The lie is the carving. The truth is the grain. The thought of the grain of the raw, unpolished substance of reality brings a sense of curiosity to your mind. You are no longer just an observer. You are becoming a seeker of the real. The golden era was a beautiful place to dwell, but it was also a place where nothing could truly grow, because growth requires the friction of reality. To live in a perfect lie is to exist in a static state, whereas truth is dynamic and constantly evolving. You feel the first stirrings of a desire to move toward that friction, to find something more substantial than mere gold. As you prepare to step forward into the next corridor, you take one last look at the magnificent fading splendor behind you. It was a beautiful beginning, a grand entrance into a world where everything was certain and nothing was lost. But you know that the shadows are growing and the cracks are widening. You carry the memory of the gold with you, but your focus is now on the dark, narrow paths where the truth might be hiding. The journey is becoming more complex, as it must, because a story without conflict is merely a polite conversation. You take a step forward, and for a brief second, you feel the floor dip slightly, as if the solid stone were yielding to your weight. It is a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but it serves as a reminder that nothing is as stable as we believe. You move into the darkness with a cautious but curious heart, ready to see what lies behind the veil. The first crack has been found. Now you must learn how to navigate the breaks. The darkness of the corridor is not absolute. It is a thick, textured gloom that seems to swallow the light before it can reach its destination. As you move deeper into the heart of the house, the feeling of being watched becomes more pronounced, as if the very walls are observing your progress with silent curiosity. You realize that the first crack in the gold was merely the beginning, a small, almost trivial thing compared to the immense weight of the falsehoods you are now starting to encounter. The magnitude of the deception is becoming apparent. It is not just a few missed details, but an entire architecture built upon a foundation of beautiful, impossible things. The air here is cooler, carrying the scent of damp stone and old, forgotten books. It feels as though you are moving through the being between two worlds, the world of the myth and the world of the truth. You find yourself walking with more intention now, your eyes searching for the places where the structure might be failing. The weight of these falsehoods is a heavy thing to carry in one's mind. It is an invisible burden that presses against the temples and makes the breath come a little more shallowly. To live within a lie is to carry the weight of its maintenance, and you can feel that gravity pulling at your spirit. You think about the vastness of the history we have inherited, the stories, passed down through generations like sacred relics. They are grand enough to fill an entire lifetime with wonder, yet they are often nothing more than a collection of convenient truths designed to maintain order and prestige. The sheer scale of human deception is staggering. It is as if we have built entire civilizations on the backs of these magnificent myths. You realize that you aren't just walking through a house. You are walking through the collective memory of humanity, trying to find where the truth was buried under the gilding. As you navigate the narrowing halls, you feel the pressure of the atmosphere pressing in from all sides. The lies were once like a warm blanket, but now they feel more like an elaborate cage, beautiful and intricate, yet still a confinement nonetheless. You realize that to live within we must constantly uphold the illusion, making sure the edges remain seamless so as not to disturb the comfort of those who rely on it. This is the hidden cost of falsehood, the constant energy required to keep the facade from crumbling. It is an exhausting existence, one that requires a constant, subtle vigilance. You encounter a doorway where the wood is dark and ancient, its surface etched with scenes of battles and feasts. You pause to look at them, seeing how the warriors are depicted as invincible and the feasts as eternal. These carvings are meant to tell a story of triumph, but in the dim light, they also tell a story of the human desire for permanence. We want our struggles to be glorious and our celebrations to be endless. But even the carved wood must eventually rot, and the stories will eventually fade into the silence of history. The weight of these falsehoods is not just a physical sensation. It is an emotional one as well. It is the realization that many of the things we hold dear, the legends of our ancestors, the much vaunted traditions, might be nothing more than carefully crafted myths meant to serve a purpose. This thought can feel heavy, like a stone in the pit of your stomach. You wonder how many people have lived their entire lives chasing after a glory that was never there, or defending an honor that was built on a foundation of sand. It is a sobering realization, making you question the stability of everything around you. You move through a room filled with old, heavy furniture chairs, with velvet seats and tables of dark oak that seem to hold the gravity of centuries within them. The sheer mass of these objects reflects the weight of the lies. They are substantial, unmoving, and seemingly eternal. Yet, as you look closer at the fine carvings on the chair legs, you see how they taper into nothingness at the base. This is a reminder that even the most massive structures depend on something delicate to hold them up. The strength of a lie is often found in its ability to appear unshakely, even when it is held by the thinnest threads. The silence here is different. It is no longer just the absence of sound, but a heavy, expectant stillness. It is as if the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to confront the magnitude of what has been hidden. The falsehoods are not merely individual lies. They are the very atmosphere of this place. You realize that you cannot simply pick them apart one by one. You must face the reality that entire worlds were built upon these illusions. This realization makes your steps more cautious, as if a single wrong move might cause everything to collapse. You think about how humans use stories to make sense of an indifferent universe. A lie can provide a sense of purpose and a clear moral compass when the truth is too chaotic to navigate. We create heroes because we need someone to lead us. We create villains because we need someone to blame. The weight of these falsehoods is the weight of our own human needs, projected onto the canvas of history. It is a heavy thing to carry, the realization that our very sense of direction might be based on something so beautifully inaccurate. As you walk, your shadow seems to stretch out before you, casting a long dark shape across the floor like an omen. You realize that as we move toward the truth, our own shadows grow longer. They become more distinct and harder to ignore. The lie was a way of shrinking ourselves into manageable shapes, but the truth is expanding us, forcing us to deal with our true proportions. It is a terrifying expansion, making you feel both larger than life and incredibly vulnerable at the same time. You are growing into the reality of your own existence. You find yourself in a hallway where the ceiling is much lower, creating an intimate but somewhat claustrophobic space. This represents the narrowing focus that comes when we begin to deal with the specifics of our disillusionment. The grand vistas are gone, replaced by the narrow corridors of hard facts and difficult truths. It is harder to breathe here, as if the air itself has become more substantial. But there is also a certain clarity in this closeness. You can no longer ignore the minute details that were once hidden by the vastness of the landscape. You contemplate the strength of those who lived within these walls. How did they manage to carry such heavy falsehoods without being crushed by them? Perhaps they didn't see them as a burden, but as the very fabric of their reality. For them, the lie was not something to be carried. It was simply the air they breathed. To us, coming from the outside, the weight is much more apparent because we are trying to hold two worlds at once, the world that was and the truth that is. It is a struggle between the comfort of the known myth and the friction of the new reality. The thought of the burden makes you want to sit, but there is no place for rest in this unfolding journey. You must keep moving, for to stand still is to let the weight press down too heavily. The darkness ahead seems to pulse with a low-frequency hum, a sound that resonates in your very bones. It is the sound of the truth waiting to be heard, a deep, resonant truth that does not care for our human vanities or our need for grandeur. You prepare yourself, tightening your resolve as you face the mounting pressure of the unknown. You realize that as you move deeper, the distinction between the lie and the truth is becoming more complex. Is a lie meant to protect us actually a different kind of truth? If an illusion makes a person better, is it still a falsehood? These are the questions that weigh upon your mind as you navigate the corridors of thought. You are learning that the weight of a lie can be either a burden or a foundation, depending on how one chooses to carry it. But for now, you must simply focus on the path and the heavy air around you. As you step into the next doorway, the darkness seems to thicken, making it difficult to distinguish between shadow and solid matter. The weight of the falsehoods is at its peak, pressing against your senses with an almost physical force. You are standing on the edge of a profound realization that we cannot live in the golden era forever without eventually losing ourselves entirely. To survive the lie, one must find a way to carry it without letting it become the master of their soul. You take a deep breath and push forward into the heavy gloom. The atmosphere becomes even more dense as you move through the thickening shadows, where the very air seems to hold the memory of every word ever whispered in these halls. You find yourself thinking about the concept of history itself, how it is not just a record of what happened, but a collection of what people wanted us to believe happened. This realization makes the weight of the falsehoods feel even more immense. We are not just walking through a house, but through a vast, layered archive of human ambition. The stories were written by winners and poets, men who wanted their lives to be etched in stone rather than written in shifting sand. You think about how much effort was spent crafting these narratives to ensure they would endure through the ages. It is a staggering thought, the sheer amount of ink, parchment, and human life dedicated to the preservation of an idealized past. To us, it might seem like a waste of energy, but to those who lived it, it was a matter of survival. A legacy was the only way to achieve immortality in a world that was so cruelly mortal. You realize that the weight you feel is actually the accumulated will of thousands of people trying to outrun time itself through the medium of story. As you walk, your footsteps sound more hollow now, as if the floor beneath you is becoming less substantial with every step. This is a physical manifestation of how history can feel when the truth begins to seep in. The grand, solid structures we thought were permanent are revealed to be much more ephemeral than they appeared. You find yourself looking at the walls, watching for the subtle shifts where the stone meets the shadows. It is as if you are searching for the seams between the historical record and the actual lived experience of those who walked these halls before us. You consider the nature of a legend, how it takes a human life and strips away all its messy, complicated nuances to create a perfect archetype. A hero is not a man. He is an idea of bravery. This simplification makes for a much better story, but it leaves out the truth of the struggle. You realize the history's greatest trick is how it turns the complex into the simple, making the past seem as though it was a clear path from one point to another. But you know better now. You know that there were no straight lines, only winding paths through the dark. The darkness seems to pulse with a low-frequency vibration, a hum that resonates in your very chest. It is the sound of the friction between the old stories and the new reality. You realize that as we look back at history, we are often looking into a mirror of our own desires. We want our ancestors to be larger than life, because it makes us feel like we are part of something grander than ourselves. This is the seductive power of historical myth. It provides an identity that is much more magnificent than the reality of being a mere mortal in a vast, indifferent universe. You think about the scribes who sat by flickering candles to write these accounts, their hands working tirelessly to translate human life into something permanent. They knew that they were creating a version of the truth, but they also believed that this version was enough to preserve the essence of what was lost. You wonder how much of our own history is actually just an elaborate pieces of literature written by those who wanted to be remembered as gods or saints. The weight of these fabrications is the weight of 1,000 pens scratching across vellum, trying to fix the past in place. As you move deeper into the archive of time, you feel the urge to reach out and touch the very air itself, to see if it has a texture like the old books you have encountered. You find that history is not just a collection of facts. It is a living, breathing thing that shapes our present, much as it once shaped the past. To understand the truth, one must first understand the lies that were used to build the world we inherited. The weight of this realization is like a heavy cloak around your neck, reminding you of the responsibility of being an observer in a world built on shadows. You consider how the great empires and dynasties used their histories as tools of power to justify wars. To solidify rule, and to define who belonged and who was an outsider. A history that is too perfect is often a weapon, a way to consolidate influence by creating a glorious past that justifies a present order. You realize that these stories were not just for the sake of memory, they were for the sake of control. This adds a layer of political weight to your journey as you see the politics of truth unfolding in every corner of this grand house. The shadows seem to coalesce into shapes of old kings and queens, their silent forms watching your progress with an ancient curiosity. You realize that history is not just about the past. It is a constant dialogue between those who are gone and those who remain. The ghosts of these legends are still here, influencing our thoughts and our values without us even realizing it. They are the invisible architects of our current reality, their voices echoing in the quiet moments of our own lives. You feel their presence as a pressure on your skin, a weight that cannot be ignored. You think about how much of ourselves we have sacrificed to fit into the narratives we were given. We often try to mold our lives to match the heroic archetypes or the tragic myths of our ancestors, forgetting that we are allowed to be something entirely different. The weight of these expectations is a heavy burden for any human soul to carry. You realize that to find true freedom, one must first acknowledge the magnitude of the lies that were used to shape us into the people we have become. As you walk through another archway, the light from your path seems to flicker, as if it too is struggling against the encroaching darkness. You realize that truth is a light that requires constant fuel, the fuel of courage and inquiry. Without that fuel, the shadows will eventually overtake the vision, leaving us lost in the magnificent but empty splendor of a grand myth. You feel a sudden, sharp need for clarity. You want to see through the gilding to the solid matter underneath. The thought of searching for truth is an exhausting one, yet it feels more necessary than ever. In the olden times, people may have been content with a well-sugared lie, but you are beginning to crave the sharp, clean edge of reality. You realize that a history of fabrications is like a house built on a shifting dune. It looks magnificent from afar, but it can never truly be at peace. This realization makes your resolve harden, even as your heart feels heavy with the enormous scope of the task before you. You wonder what would happen if all the illusions were stripped away in an instant. Would we still recognize ourselves? Or would we find that our very identities are woven from these threads of myth and legend? This question lingers in the air like a fine mist, making everything seem slightly more ethereal and less certain. It is a profound thought, one that makes you walk with a sense of reverence for the gravity of what you are uncovering. As you continue your journey into the heart of the archive, you realize that to understand why we love the lies, we must first admit how much they served us. They provided a structure, a meaning, and a sense of belonging in an often chaotic world. But as you face the magnitude of these fabrications, you also see their cost. The truth is often sacrificed at the altar of grandeur. You are moving toward a place where the old stories must meet their match in the reality of the present moment. The darkness seems to thin slightly as you approach another threshold, but the weight remains constant. You take a breath and prepare yourself for the next layer of history, knowing that every step forward is a step away from the comfort of the myth and toward the beautiful, terrifying clarity of what truly was. The journey is becoming more intense, and your focus must remain sharp if you are to find the truth amidst the vastness of the legends. The path ahead becomes a narrow, winding corridor where the walls seem to press inward with an almost tactile pressure. You are now moving through the very marrow of the history you have been contemplating. The silent, dusty corridors of time, where the truth is often buried deep beneath layers of sediment and legend. The air is thick with the scent of old parchment, dried ink, and the faint metallic tang of a long-forgotten library. It is as if you are walking through the physical manifestation of human memory, where every breath you take stirs up the dust of 1,000 years of thought. This is the realm of the scholars and the seekers, but it is also the realm of those who wish to bury their secrets in the dark. You think about the scribes who once inhabited this space, the men with ink-stained fingers and eyes, dimmed by the flickering light of 1,000 candles. They were the architects of these stories, carefully crafting the narratives that would become our history. You realize that they were not just recording facts. They suddenly was creating an enduring reality out of nothing but their own perception. The weight of their pens is felt in every word you read, as if their very hands are still guiding the flow of the narrative. It is a heavy realization to know how much of our past is shaped by the subjective hand of the chronicler. The scent of old parchment becomes more intense as you pass through a doorway into an even older section of the structure. It smells of time itself, the dry, sweet decay of paper, and the musty breath of centuries-old volumes. You can almost hear the rustle of pages turning in the silence, a spectral sound that echoes your own movement. To walk among these archives is to walk through the thoughts of those who have long since passed into the great unknown. It is an intimate and intimidating experience, as if you are eavesdropping on the private deliberations of history's many actors. As you look at the shelves that line the walls, towering structures of dark wood that seem to hold up the very ceiling, you realize how much knowledge has been gathered here. Yet you also know that for every truth recorded, 1,000 lies were used to protect it or mask it. The archives are as much a graveyard of falsehoods as they are a repository of wisdom. You find yourself wondering which of these books contain the true essence of human life and which ones are merely beautifully bound fabrications designed to satisfy the curiosity of the future. You think about the nature of searching for truth in such a vast, overwhelming expanse of information. It is like trying to find a single grain of sand on a great beach, or a single clear thought in a sea of human confusion. The sheer volume of history can be paralyzing. It makes one feel as though they might drown in the sheer magnitude of what has been lived and lost. This is why people often prefer the lie. It is easier to hold on to a neat, small story than to face the infinite complexity of the actual past. You realize that your own journey is a struggle against this overwhelming scale. The shadows here are deep and velvety, making it difficult to judge the distance between yourself and the next shelf or doorway. This is an accurate reflection of how much we often misunderstand the depth of history. We think we know where things stand, but there are depths that we cannot even begin to fathom. The darkness represents the unrecorded moments, the lies lived in the margins, whose stories were never deemed worthy of being written down by the masters. You are moving through a landscape of both the known and the profoundly unknown. You consider how much of our current understanding is based on these old fragments, these pieces of parchment that have survived the ravages of time. We piece together the truth like a jigsaw puzzle with missing parts, trying to make sense of the whole while knowing that we can never truly see the full picture. This realization brings a sense of humility. We are not masters of history, but merely its interpreters, working with imperfect tools and incomplete data. The weight of this thought is a constant companion in these silent corridors. As you reach out to touch the spine of an ancient book, you feel a sudden jingle of energy, as if the very knowledge held within might leap into your hand. You realize that history is not just dead facts. It is the living spirit of human endeavor, constantly trying to manifest itself in our present lives. The scribes knew this. They were writing for us, even as they wrote for their own time. They were crafting a legacy that would bridge the gap between the mortal and the eternal, much like we try to do today. You think about the tension between the written word and the truth of the human heart. A book can tell you what a king did, but it often fails to tell you how he felt or what he feared in the quiet hours before dawn. The history books are a skeleton, providing the structure, but they lack the flesh and blood that made those lives truly real. You realize that to find the true history, one must look for the gaps between the words, the silences where the truth is hiding from the light of the page. The dimming light makes you squint as you peer into a darkened alcove where more books are stacked in precarious piles. They seem to lean toward you, like ancient sages waiting to impart their secrets or warn you of the dangers ahead. You realize that the search for truth is not just an intellectual endeavor. It is a physical and emotional journey through the dark. It requires the courage to face the unknown and the patience to wait for the light to reveal what has been hidden. You wonder how many people have lost themselves in these archives, becoming so absorbed in the stories of the past that they forgot to live their own lives. The weight of history can be a heavy burden if it is carried without purpose. It can become an anchor rather than a sail. You realize that you must find a balance to honor the history while still walking your own path with clarity and intention. This is the challenge of being a person living in the wake of so much immense human experience. The air seems to grow heavier as you contemplate the sheer volume of time that has passed since these books were first bound. The centuries press against you, reminding you of the fleeting nature of your own moment. Yet, within this weight, there is a sense of continuity. You are part of an unbroken chain of human existence, stretching back into the darkness and forward into the light. To be a seeker of truth is to recognize your place in this long and complicated lineage of thinkers and believers. You think about how many secrets are locked away in these wooden cabinets and iron-bound chests. Some were hidden to protect the powerful. Some were lost because they were too dangerous for the common people to know. The history we read is often the history that was allowed to survive, while the truths that could not be reconciled with the grand narratives were cast aside into the shadows. You are walking through a landscape of selective memory, where the truth has been curated by the hands of time and human will. As you continue forward, your own footsteps seem to echo the rhythm of the scribe's pens, a steady, purposeful movement toward an end that is always just out of sight. You realize that you are not just studying history. You are experiencing it as a living presence. The task of the seeker is to remain vigilant, to keep the light of inquiry burning, even when the darkness seems most profound. You take another breath of the dusty air and prepare yourself for the next revelation. The silence here is almost musical, a low hum that carries the weight of all the unsaid words in these stacks of parchment. You feel as though you are moving through a temple built to honor the pursuit of knowledge, yet one where the gods themselves might be lost in the shadows. The search for truth is a sacred task, but it is also a heavy one. You continue your walk, feeling the weight of the centuries pressing gently against your soul, guiding you toward the next great discovery. The darkness in this section of the archives is more profound now, a deep indigo that seems to pulse with the slow rhythm of an ancient heart. You are no longer just walking through a house or a library. You are moving through the very concept of memory itself. The air feels thick and velvety, as if you are wading through a sea of forgotten thoughts and half-remembered dreams. This is where the weight of our human history becomes most palpable, in the vast, silent spaces between what we knew then and what we understand now. You feel the gravity of the past, pulling at your limbs, urging you to slow down, or perhaps to stop entirely and surrender to the quietude. You find yourself reflecting on why the heart so often gravitates toward a beautiful lie instead of a difficult truth. There is a profound comfort in a story that makes sense, a narrative where heroes are clearly defined and the world follows a predictable path. To live within a lie is to live in a cocoon, protected from the sharp edges and sudden gusts of an unpredictable reality. For many, this was not an act of deception, but a necessary means of survival. It provided a sense of order that made the chaos of existence bearable. You realize that you too once found comfort in these grand illusions, letting them soothe your restless spirit. The thought of the comfort of the lie brings a certain warmth to your mind, like the soft glow of an old hearth on a winter's night. In our own lives, we often build elaborate structures of belief, not because they are true, but because they make us feel safe and significant. A lie can be a magnificent structure, much like these vaulted ceilings or the ornate carvings around you. It provides a sense of place and identity that is far more flattering than the raw, unvarnished truth of our own human frailty. You realize how easily we let ourselves be seduced by the beauty of an elegant falsehood. As you move through the dim light, you see the ghosts of old justifications, the excuses humans have made for centuries to keep their magnificent myths alive. We tell ourselves that certain truths are too harsh, or that a little bit of deception is necessary for the greater good. You realize that much of history was written this way, as a collection of necessary lies designed to maintain social order, honor, or even divine authority. This realization makes the weight of the falsehoods feel more personal. It is not just an ancient problem, but a human one that we carry in our own hearts every single day. You think about how much energy was spent defending these beautiful illusions, how many wars were fought, and how many lives were sacrificed to preserve a lie that could no longer sustain itself. It is a tragic thought, yet there is an undeniable nobility in the human will to hold on to something so precious, even when it is slipping away. You feel a kinship with those who fought for their myths, understanding the desperation of wanting to believe in something greater than the mundane reality of survival. The lie was often a shield against the terrifying vastness of the unknown. The air here seems to carry the echo of old defenses, the arguments used to justify the unjustifiable, and the beautiful masks worn by the flawed. You realize that we are not just dealing with historical lies, but with the internal narratives we use to maintain our own sense of self. We create versions of ourselves that are more consistent and heroic than we actually are, much like the kings in these portraits. The comfort of the lie is the comfort of an idealized identity, a way to live without the constant friction of our own contradictions. As you walk through a doorway into a room where the light filters through stained glass, casting colorful patterns on the floor, you see how the lie can be a kaleidoscope of beauty. The colors are dazzling and wonderful, but they are also a refraction, a distortion of the true white light passing through them. This is the essence of the beautiful fiction. It takes a simple truth and expands it into something spectacular to mask its inherent simplicity. You realize that while the colors are breathtaking, they are not the sun itself. The colored patterns on the floor seem to shift as you move, creating a moving tapestry of light and shadow. You find yourself contemplating how we use these colors to decorate our own lives, to make our history more vibrant and our struggles more meaningful. A lie can be a way to add color to a monochromatic existence, making the world feel richer than it truly is. This was your comfort. You were lost in the beautiful hues of the legend, finding joy in the artistry of the deception. You think about how hard it is to walk away from such beauty. To abandon the lie means to step out into a world that might be gray or harsh or uncomfortably plain. The fear of losing the splendor is what makes us cling so tightly to our illusions. You realize that your own journey was delayed by this very fear, the hesitation of someone who knows they are, leaving a warm room for a cold night. It takes immense courage to trade the gold-leafed story for the raw, honest truth. As you look at the patterns on the floor, you see how they overlap and blend, much like how various lies can intertwine into a complex web of history. One lie supports another, creating a structure that is almost impossible to pull apart without destroying everything built upon it. You realize that once we begin to question one part of our reality, we must question the whole. This realization makes your heart race slightly. It is the terrifying prospect of a total unraveling. You reflect on how much human progress has been driven by these grand illusions, the pursuit of glory, the expansion of empires, and the building of cathedrals to gods who may or may not have heard our prayers. These were all fueled by something more than just survival. They were fueled by the desire to live out a magnificent myth. You realize that while many of these things were built on lies, they also produced incredible works of art and human achievement. The tension between the truth and the grandeur is one of the great struggles of the human condition. The light through the stained glass seems to pulse with a slow, rhythmic energy, as if the colors themselves are breathing. You realize that even in our lies, there is a kind of life of vitality that keeps us moving forward. The question is how to live without losing our soul to the deception. How do we cherish the beauty while remaining grounded in the truth? This is the central paradox you are learning to navigate as you walk through these ancient halls. You think about the people who lived within these stories, the poets, the kings, and the peasants alike. For some, the lie was a luxury. For others, it was a necessity to endure a hard life. You realize that our relationship with falsehood is deeply tied to our own needs and vulnerabilities. To understand why we love the lies, we must first understand what they were giving us, the solace of meaning in an often meaningless world. As you step out of the colorful light and back into the more somber corridors, you feel a sense of longing for the colored patterns on the floor. It is natural to miss the brilliance, even as we seek the clarity of the truth. This tension between the aesthetic and the authentic is something you must carry with you. You take a breath and prepare yourself for the next stage of the journey, knowing that the comfort of the lie is a heavy thing to leave behind. The silence returns, but it feels less like an end and more like a preparation. You are moving away from the era of being comforted and toward the period where you must face the truth itself. The weight is still there, but it is beginning to feel less like an anchor and more like a training weight, strengthening your spirit for what is to come. You continue forward, your eyes clear and your heart ready for the next unfolding reality. The atmosphere shifts once more as you move into a space where the shadows are no longer just soft veils, but sharp, defined edges. This is the realm of the unraveling, the place where the threads of our long-held stories begin to fray and pull apart. The air here feels thinner, crisper, almost as if it has been stripped of its warmth to make room for a sudden, biting clarity. You are no longer walking through a world of beautiful illusions. You are walking into the space where the truth begins to assert itself with an unrelenting force. It is a time of transition, where the seamlessness of a lie is being disrupted by the jagged reality of fact. You think about how a single thread, when pulled, can begin to undo an entire tapestry of belief. A single small inconsistency, a tiny mismatch between what we were told and what we see with our own eyes, can act like a catalyst for everything else. You realize that the unraveling is not a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual process of realization. It starts as a doubt, then becomes a question, and finally grows into an undeniable truth that can no longer be ignored. This is the unfolding of reality, where the magnificent structure begins to reveal its true form. The darkness here is not empty. It is filled with the tension of things coming apart. You feel a sense of vertigo as you walk, as if the ground itself might shift beneath your feet. The weight of the truths you're beginning to encounter is far more substantial than the lightness of the lies were. It is a heavy sensation, one that forces you to be more deliberate with every step. You realize that you can no longer glide through life on the smooth surface of a myth. You must now navigate the uneven terrain of reality. You look at the walls around you and see where the cracks have begun to spread. They are like lightning bolts frozen in stone, tracing the paths of old deceptions as they break open. To some, these cracks might look like destruction, but you begin to see them as something else, as openings through which we can finally see what is truly there. The truth was always behind the gold, and now the gold is peeling away to reveal the substance that lies beneath. This realization is both terrifying and exhilarating. It is the death of one world and the birth of another. You think about how much energy we expend trying to keep our illusions whole. We spend so much time patching up the cracks and smoothing over the rough edges just to maintain the appearance of perfection. But as you realize, the more we try to hold it together, the more the tension builds within us. The unraveling is a release of that pressure, a necessary letting go of the old forms so that something new can emerge. You realize that our struggle to keep the lie alive is often what makes its eventual fall so painful. The atmosphere is heavy with the sound of ancient things breaking, not with a crash, but with the slow, grinding noise of shifting tectonic plates. It is an internal sound, one that resonates in your very soul. You realize that you are not just witnessing history. You are experiencing the dismantling of your own perceptions. The unraveling is as much about your own mind as it is about the world around you. This is a deeply personal realization, making the journey feel more like an internal struggle than an external exploration. You consider the courage required to watch the things we once loved fall apart. To see a beautiful story break is to face the loss of the comfort it provided. You realize that many people would rather live in a crumbling lie than in a solid truth, because the lie was familiar and the truth is new and unpredictable. This tension between the old and the new is what gives the unfolding its power. You are learning to be brave enough to stand amidst the ruins of your own certainties. As you move through the narrowing passages, the sense of being caught in a web becomes even more pronounced. The threads of truth are like fine, sharp wires that cut through the soft illusions we have woven around ourselves. It is an uncomfortable sensation, much like the feeling of shedding old skin to make room for something new. You realize that the unraveling is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be transformative. To grow into a person who can handle the truth, we must first shed the layers that hold us back. You think about how many great civilizations were brought low by the very myths they relied upon for strength. When the core of a story becomes too hollow to support the weight of reality, it collapses under its own grandeur. This is the danger of the lie. It can grow larger than the truth can sustain. You realize that we are walking through the ruins of such collapsed worlds, and there is a profound lesson in the rubble. The history of humanity is often a cycle of building magnificent myths, only to watch them crumble before our eyes. The shadows seem to dance with an almost frantic energy as they struggle against the growing clarity. It is as if the darkness itself knows it is being revealed, and its final efforts are to obscure what is coming. You realize that the more we look for truth, the more the lies will try to hide themselves in the corners of our vision. This is a cosmic game of hide and seek, where the prize is the clarity of our own existence. You find yourself leaning into the darkness, ready to face whatever it reveals. You consider how the unraveling changes us, how it strips away our vanity and forces us to look at ourselves with unclouded eyes. It is a humbling process, making us realize that we are not the gods we once thought we were. This realization is heavy, yet there is a strange sense of freedom in being smaller, more human, and more real than the legends suggested. You realize that the truth does not need to be grand to be meaningful. It only needs to be true. The sensation of the weight shifting from one foot to the other as you walk is like the movement of a pendulum. It reminds you that life is a constant balance between the known and the unknown, the lie and the truth. You are learning how to find your footing on the uneven ground of reality. This is the core of the work learning, to live within the cracks without losing our sense of direction or purpose. The unraveling is the training ground for a life lived with clarity. You think about the beautiful, terrible moment when a myth finally breaks entirely. It is an instant of profound silence, followed by a sudden rush of air as the old structures fall away. You wonder if you are ready for such a moment, or if you will try to catch the falling pieces to rebuild the lie once more. But even as you ponder this, you realize that your hands are already beginning to let go of the gold-leafed fragments. The truth is calling us forward into the void of the new. The darkness ahead seems to tighten around you like a tightening knot, making the path narrower and more challenging. You realize that as we move toward the truth, the journey often becomes more difficult before it becomes easier. This is the paradox of the seeker. We must go through the narrowing of our own certainty to reach the expansion of true understanding. You take another deep breath and step into the next shadow, ready for the next layer to peel away. As you walk, you realize that you are not just a traveler in history. You are an active participant in its unfolding. The unraveling is happening within you, even as it happens around you. You carry the weight of your own personal myths, and they too are beginning to fray at the edges. This realization makes every step more significant, for you are not just discovering the truth, you are becoming a vessel for it. The shadows have become much sharper now, almost like blades of dark light that cut through the air with a surgical precision. You are no longer drifting. You are moving with a keen awareness of the space around you, as if your very senses were being honed by the tension of the unfolding truth. This is the time of facing the mirror, the moment when the illusions we have built to hide our own vulnerabilities are stripped away, leaving us to confront ourselves as they truly are. The air is cold and clear, like a winter morning where the frost makes everything look crystalline and stark. It is an atmosphere of profound introspection, where there is no place to hide from your own reflection. You think about how we use our grand narratives to mask our human imperfections. We create legends of perfect kings or infallible saints so that we can believe in a standard that we can never truly reach. But the mirror does not care for our ideals. It only shows us the truth of our own eyes and the reality of our own mortality. This is the terror of the mirror, the realization that there is no one to blame for the cracks but ourselves. You realize that facing the truth is, at its heart, an act of profound self-confrontation. As you move through this crystalline space, you find yourself looking for mirrors in every polished surface. The dark wood of the cabinets, the glass of the old frames, even the still water in a small decorative basin on a side table. Each reflection is a moment of truth, an encounter with a different facet of your own being. You realize that we cannot look away from ourselves forever. Eventually, we must face the person behind the mask. The weight of this task is immense, making every step feel like a walk across a thin bridge of glass. You consider how much of our identity is tied to the lies we tell about who we are. We build up these elaborate personas to navigate the world and to protect ourselves from being seen too clearly. But as the illusions fade, we must ask, who am I truly when the stories are gone? This question is the most daunting part of the journey, the fear that there might be nothing left once the grand myth is dismantled. You realize that the terror is not in finding out who we are, but in the possibility of being much smaller than we thought. The coldness of the air serves as a constant reminder of the unvarnished truth. It is not a warm or comfortable sensation, but it is an honest one. You realize that there was nothing wrong with the warmth of the lie. It was simply insufficient for the reality of existence. Truth does not need to be comforting to be necessary. Sometimes it needs to be sharp to cut through our complacency. This realization makes you tighten your grip on your own sense of self, preparing for the clarity of the cold. You think about how we often look to history or to the great figures of old to find ourselves. We try to project our lives onto their much larger-than-life struggles, hoping that their greatness will somehow rub off on us through the mere act of emulation. But when we face the mirror of truth, we see that they were just as humanly fragile as we are. The legendary becomes humanized, and in doing so, loses its ability to serve as a perfect archetype. You realize that this is not a loss. It is an invitation to be truly human. As you approach a large antique mirror leaning against the far wall, your heart begins to beat with a more rhythmic, heavy pulse. The glass is dark and slightly clouded by age, but as you draw closer, you can see your own silhouette beginning to take shape within it. This is the moment of reckoning, the confrontation between the one who knows and the certainty of being known. You realize that there is no escaping this encounter. The mirror has been waiting for you since the very first crack appeared in the gold. You consider how much we have used our history to define ourselves as a people or as individuals. We use these stories to separate us from others and to provide a sense of collective identity. But when the truth is revealed, those boundaries often become more complex and less certain. You realize that while the lie provided a clear boundary, the truth offers a much more intricate and nuanced map of human connection. This makes you wonder if we are ready for the complexity that comes with an honest history. The thought of being seen is one of the most vulnerable human experiences. We spend so much energy trying to control how others perceive us, but the mirror offers no such illusion of control. It reflects our gaze back at us, unbesetting and absolute. You realize that facing the truth is an act of radical honesty, not just with ourselves, but with the world. It is a moment where we must decide if we have the strength to stand before the reality of who we are without the masks of greatness or tragedy. You think about how many people throughout history lived their entire lives in front of a false mirror, never once truly seeing themselves or the truth of their era. They were content with the reflection they were given, as long as it was beautiful. You realize that you are among the few who have dared to look deeper, and this makes your journey both more difficult and more meaningful. The courage to face the truth is a rare commodity in a world that often prefers the comfort of a well-crafted lie. As you stand before the mirror, the light seems to focus entirely on your own eyes within the reflection. You are no longer looking at the history around you. You are looking at the observer who interprets it. This is the ultimate realization. Truth is not just an external reality we discover. It is a relationship between our perception and the world. The mirror shows us that we are both the seeker and the sought, the historian and the subject of the story. You consider how much of the darkness was actually a way to avoid seeing ourselves clearly. When things were bright and golden, there was nothing to hide behind. But in the shadows, we could pretend to be something more than human. Now that the light is sharpening, those hiding places are disappearing. You realize that we must learn to live with our own visibility, to be okay with being seen as a mortal, imperfect human being without the need for mythical grandeur. The tension in the air seems to peak as you raise your hand toward the surface of the glass. The reflection of your fingers looks almost spectral, a ghost of a person seeking solid ground. You realize that this is the moment where the internal and external meet, where the history we have studied meets the soul that must live it. It is an overwhelming sensation of being at once very small and infinitely significant. You think about how many people would call you a fool for seeking the truth when the lie was so much more beautiful. But there is a quiet strength in the pursuit, a sense of purpose that the easy comfort could never provide. You realize that even if the mirror shows us something plain or difficult, it is still a more honest companion than a perfect fiction. The courage to face ourselves is the first step toward true wisdom. As your fingers finally brush against the cool surface of the glass, you feel a sudden sharp jolt of clarity. It is as if the mirror has become a threshold between the old world and the new. You are no longer just looking at yourself. You are stepping into a confrontation that will define everything you know about being alive. The time for reflection is over. Now begins the time to truly see. The mirror's surface, though ancient and slightly warped by time, provides a clarity that is both jarring and profound. As you stand before it, the reflection of your own face seems more real than the history you have been traversing. This is where we confront the ghosts of great men, the legends whose lives were built into grand, monolithic structures of glory to mask their human frailty. We look at the statues and the portraits, and we see gods. But when we look through the lens of truth, we see something much more complex. The realization that our heroes were merely humans is not meant to diminish them, but to bring us closer to the reality they inhabited. You think about how the greats of history were often just people who were exceptionally good at maintaining a powerful illusion. They used their charisma and their power to shape the narrative around themselves, much like the gilding on these walls. You realize that we must learn to distinguish between the legend and the person, to see the man or woman behind the myth without losing sight of the impact they had on the world. This is the delicate balance of understanding history, to respect the influence while acknowledging the human truth. The atmosphere in this hall of reflections is one of quiet, solemn reckoning. The ghosts of these legends seem to hover at the edges of your vision, their silent presence a reminder of the struggle between fame and reality. You realize that much of human history has been an attempt to achieve a greatness that is essentially a shadow, a pursuit of an eternalized self that can never truly exist in the physical world. It is a ghost dance of ambition, where we chase after ghosts while ignoring the solid ground beneath us. You consider how many legends were crafted, specifically because they were too large to be humanly believable. They were designed to be unassailable, to stand as monuments that could not be questioned or dismantled by the common man. But a legend that is too perfect is often fragile. It cannot withstand the weight of real history. You realize that the most enduring legacies are those that allow for the humanity of their creators, the stories that can hold both the glory and the tragedy in one hand. The thought of these great ghosts brings a sense of solemnity to your thoughts. They were people of immense will, yet they too were subject to the same fears and doubts as anyone else. You realize that we often project our own desires for immortality onto them, making them more than they were to make ourselves feel part of something eternal. This is the trap of history. We turn men into myths so they can carry our burdens, but in doing so, we lose their true essence. You think about the nature of fame and how it has been used throughout time as a tool for shaping truth. Fame provides a megaphone that can drown out the quiet voices of reality, making the legend seem more dominant than the facts themselves. You realize that history is often just the loudest voice being recorded by the most enduring scribes. This is why we must look deeper to find the voices that were silenced by the roar of greatness to understand the full scope of what actually happened. As you walk through the hall, the ghosts seem to pulse with a quiet, rhythmic energy. They are not frightening. They are simply waiting to be understood on their own terms. You realize that to truly know history, we must let go of our desire for them to be perfect and instead learn to live with their imperfections. It is in the cracks of their character that we find the true truth of their lives, the parts that make their impact so humanly profound. You consider how many people have been trapped by the very legends they helped create. To be a great leader often requires maintaining an impossible standard, leading to a life of constant tension and hidden suffering. You realize that for some, the lie was not just a tool, but a prison, a gilded cage built by their own ambition or the expectations of their people. This is the tragedy of the greatness we so often envy. It can be a lonely and heavy burden to carry. The sense of being in an era of ghosts makes you feel as though you are walking through a graveyard of reputations. We judge the past by the standards of today, but they were judging themselves by the standards of their own magnificent myths. You realize that we must approach history with both empathy and scrutiny, understanding why they sought the glory they did, while still holding them to the truth of their actions. This is how we bridge the gap between then and now. You think about the empty pedestals in the corners of the room's monuments, waiting for a hero that may or may not have existed as we imagine them. They are silent reminders of the human desire to leave something behind that can outlast our own mortal breath. You realize that while the pedestal is empty, the truth of their existence remains, even if the legend has faded into nothingness. We must learn to value the reality over the monument. As you move through Thess Hall, you feel a sense of respect for those who lived before us, but also a healthy skepticism toward the legends they left behind. You are learning that history is not just about the names we know. It is about the human condition that connects all generations. This is the true legacy, the shared experience of being alive, regardless of how much gold was on our crowns or how many battles were won. You realize that the ghosts do not want to be worshipped. They simply want to be understood as the humans they actually were. They are looking for a connection with us through the truth of their own stories. You feel a sense of peace in this realization, as if you are finally beginning to speak the same language as the ancestors you have been meeting. The silence of history is not empty. It is a dialogue waiting to happen. The shadows seem to thin slightly at the edges of your vision, revealing more of the architecture that supports these legendary halls. You realize that even the greatest myths were built on the work of many hands, often unnamed and uncelebrated. This realization makes you think of all the silent contributors to history, the millions who lived without a legend, but whose lives collectively shaped the course of human existence. They are the true substance of the past. As you continue your journey, you feel more grounded in the reality of the ghost's presence. You are no just observing them. You are learning how to walk alongside their memories without being lost in their grandeur. This is a vital part of your transformation, becoming someone who can witness greatness without forgetting the truth of our own mortality. The darkness of the hall begins to feel less like an obstacle and more like a space for contemplation. The shadows in this section of the halls are no longer just dark shapes. They have become almost tangible, a thick veil that you must push through with deliberate purpose. You find yourself thinking about the silence after the storm, the quiet, heavy space that follows a great upheaval, or the collapse of a long-held belief. This is the period of reflection where we sit among the ruins of our certainty and listen to the echoes of what was once believed to be absolute truth. The air is still, yet there is a sense of profound movement, as if the very atoms are settling into new positions after a great shift. You realize that you are currently in a period of silence within your own journey, a time where the old stories have fallen away, but the new truths haven't fully taken their place. It is a space of transition, much like the quiet between a lightning flash and the roll of thunder. You feel the weight of the silence as a physical presence, yet it is not empty. It is filled with the potential for all that is to come. This is where we learn to listen to the truth without the distraction of the grandiloquent music of our own myths. As you move through the stillness, you think about how much of our lives are spent in noise, the constant clamor of human ambition, and the frantic rush of survival. We often use this noise to drown out the quiet, uncomfortable truths that wait for us in the stillness. But as you walk here, you realize that the silence is not an enemy. It is a space of clarity. To live within the silence is to allow ourselves the time to truly hear the nuances of our own existence and the subtle whispers of history. You consider how many great shifts in human history were followed by long periods of quietude, where people had to learn how to live in a new reality. After the fall of an empire or the end of an era, there is a period of waiting, a time when the dust must settle before anything can be built anew. You realize that you are experiencing this same process on a personal level. The silence is the space where we gather ourselves and prepare for the next chapter of our unfolding truth. The air is so still, it feels as though your own breath might disturb the balance of the room. This is the fragility of the moment, the realization that even the most profound truths are often found in the quietest spaces. You think about how much we miss when we are looking for the thunder and the lightning, ignoring the subtle shifts that define our lives. The silence is not an absence. It is a presence that demands our full attention and our deepest reflection. You realize that you have been carrying the noise of the old stories with you, even as you walked into this silent hall. The echoes of the greats and their grand-scale dramas still ring in your mind, making it difficult to truly hear the silence. To find peace in the truth, one must first learn to quiet the internal clamor of our own human egos. This is a crucial part of your journey, learning to be comfortable with the stillness that follows the end of an illusion. As you walk through a room filled with nothing but empty pedestals and dust-covered tables, you see how silence can also be a reflection of what has been lost. The emptinesses are not just vacancies. They are the imprints of things that once were. You realize that we must learn to sit with loss as much as we learn to celebrate gain. The silence is where we process our grief for the illusions we have let go and the people who were lost along the way. You think about how the human soul requires moments of stillness to remain healthy, yet we are often afraid of the quiet because it forces us to face ourselves. We fill our lives with distractions to avoid the sudden clarity that comes when everything falls silent. You realize that this journey is a training for the silence, a way to become someone who can dwell in the still waters without fear or hesitation. This is where true wisdom begins to take root in the human spirit. The darkness around you seems to pulse with a slow, rhythmic breath, almost like a heartbeat of the earth itself. You realize that the world does stop when our myths fall. It continues its silent work, indifferent to our human drama. This is both terrifying and comforting, the realization that there is an eternal rhythm far beyond our small, mortal struggles. The silence is the sound of the universe continuing its course without the need for our validation or our grand narratives. You consider how many people have found their greatest strength in the quiet moments after a great struggle. It is in the stillness that we find the clarity to rebuild and the wisdom to move forward with purpose. You realize that your current silence is not a period of inactivity, but a time of immense internal growth. The work being done in the silence is more important than the work done in the noise, for it is here that our foundations are truly reshaped. As you move through the hall of reflections, you see how the shadows themselves seem to be resting. They are not chasing you. They are simply being. This realization makes you realize that we don't always need to be doing or achieving. Sometimes we just need to exist in the truth of our own presence. To be still is a profound act of courage, especially when we have been taught that only movement and noise signify life. You think about how much of history was made by people who were often at their most brilliant during moments of quiet reflection. The great ideas are rarely born in the roar of the crowd. They are conceived in the solitude of the mind. You realize that your own journey into the truth requires this kind of solitary work, the internal dialogue between your old self and your emerging reality. This is the sacred labor of the seeker. The stillness is a heavy thing, yet it feels like a cleansing force as you continue your walk. It washes away the clutter of the false grandeur, leaving only the essential truths behind. You realize that by letting go of the big stories, you are making room for something much more profound, the simple truth of being alive in this moment. The silence is the clearing where we can finally see clearly. As you approach a doorway into another hall, you feel a sense of anticipation mixed with a quiet peace. You are no longer fighting the silence. You are embracing it as a necessary part of your journey. You realize that to find the truth, one must first become a master of the stillness. The silence is not an ending. It is the space where we prepare for our next great realization. You take a deep breath, letting the quietness fill your lungs, and step through the doorway with a renewed sense of purpose. You are walking into the heart of your own unfolding truth, carrying nothing but the clarity that the silence has provided. The journey is becoming more focused, as if the very air is guiding you toward your next great discovery. The transition into this new space feels like stepping out of a deep, quiet pool and onto solid, albeit uneven, ground. You are now entering the time of the heavy burden, the period when we must deal with the sheer weight of knowing too much. As you move through these corridors, the realization that truth is not just a source of clarity, but also a source of profound responsibility begins to settle upon your soul. To know the true history of things, to see through the gold and into the grit, is to carry a heavy load of unvarnished reality. This is the part of the journey where we must learn how to bear the weight without letting it crush our spirit. You think about how much easier it was when we only knew the beautiful, simplified versions of life. The lies were light. They were airy and could be carried with a mere thought or a casual glance. But the truth is heavy, it has mass, texture, and an unyielding presence. You realize that as you gain more understanding, your own sense of existence becomes more substantial and thus much harder to carry. This is the price we pay for our curiosity. The heavier the truth, the slower our step must become. As you walk through a hall lined with heavy, iron-bound chests and massive stone plinths, you see the physical manifestation of this weight. These objects were built to hold something significant, yet they also represent the gravity of human history itself. You realize that we are not just historians. We are collectors of truth, gathering the heavy fragments of a world that was once much more certain. This is the burden of the seeker, to carry the collective memory of all we have learned without losing our own footing in the present. You consider how many people throughout history were overwhelmed by the weight of their own discoveries or the truths they uncovered about their societies. For some, it was too much to bear. They retreated back into the comfort of the lie because the reality was simply too heavy for a human heart to carry alone. You realize that our struggle is not just with the truth itself, but with our ability to endure its magnitude. This is why we must build ourselves up as we learn to make our spirits strong enough for the weight of reality. The air here feels denser, almost like walking through water. The gravity seems to increase with every step you take toward the heart of the structure. You realize that this is a necessary part of the process. The more truth we encounter, the more grounded we become. While it may feel heavy, there is also an incredible sense of stability in being so deeply connected to what is real. The weight is not just a burden. It's also our anchor, keeping us from drifting back into the aimless clouds of myth. You think about how much of ourselves we have sacrificed to maintain the lightness of our old illusions. We shed our depth and our complexity in order to be more easily understood or to fit into the smooth narratives of our era. But as you face the weight, you realize that a life without weight is a life without substance. It lacks the gravity required to hold us true to ourselves. The truth is heavy because it is real, and reality is the only thing that can truly support a human soul. As you gaze at the massive columns of stone that rise up from the floor, you realize they are like the pillars of history, massive, unmoving, and bearing the weight of everything above them. They represent the hard truths that sustain civilizations, but they also remind us that even the strongest structures must be supported by a solid foundation. You realize that our own lives must be built on these heavy, honest realities if we are to stand tall against the winds of time. The weight is what makes the structure meaningful. You consider how much we often try to avoid the heavy parts of life, the hard truths about mortality, suffering, and human imperfection. We prefer the light, buoyant stories that make us feel as though we are floating above the messines of existence. But you realize that without the weight of these truths, we have no traction. We cannot move forward with true purpose if we are always trying to escape the gravity of our own reality. The heaviness is what gives our movements meaning and direction. The darkness between the pillars seems to hold a tremendous pressure, as if the very history of the world is pressing against your skin. You realize that this is the weight of human experience, the collective sorrow, joy, and struggle of billions of souls who have lived before us. To know this is to carry their stories within our own hearts. This is not just a personal burden. It is an ancestral one, a responsibility to hold the truth for those who can no longer carry it themselves. You think about how we can turn this weight into strength. If we view the truth as a heavy load to be carried, we will eventually tire and fall. But if we see it as the very foundation of our being, we can use it to build something magnificent. You realize that the goal is not to make the truth lighter, but to make ourselves stronger through the act of carrying it. This is the essence of wisdom, learning to find stability in the heaviness of existence. As you move into a more open hall, where the ceiling rises once more, you see how the weight is distributed through the architecture. The massive columns do not just hold up the roof. They define the space itself. You realize that our truths also define our own internal landscape, creating the structure of our character and the boundaries of our wisdom. A person without a heavy truth is like a room without walls. They have no shape and no place to call home. The thought of being without weight makes you realize how much we fear the heaviness of an honest life. We think that if we carry too much, we will become bogged down or slowed by our own understanding. But a heavy soul is a substantial one. It is a soul that can withstand the storms of change because its mass provides stability. You are learning to embrace your own weight as a sign of your growing depth and reality. You consider how much of human history has been a struggle between those who wanted to fly with light illusions and those who chose to walk with heavy truths. There is no right or wrong way to live, but there is a difference in the kind of life we lead. You realize that you are choosing the path of substance, the harder but more enduring path of the truth seeker. This realization makes your resolve harden, even as the weight presses into your spirit. As you approach the next section of the journey, you feel a sense of profound respect for the sheer mass of what you have uncovered. The history you are learning is not just a collection of facts. It is a mountain to be climbed and a foundation to be built upon. You realize that your own body and mind must become as resilient as the stone pillars around you. The weight is not an obstacle to the path. The weight is the path. You take another deep, heavy breath, feeling the pressure in your chest as a sign of life. It is a grounding sensation, much like the pull of gravity on the earth itself. You prepare yourself for the next stage, the realization that even this weight has its own intricate and beautiful structure. The journey continues, deeper into the heart of reality. The air around you seems to thicken, as if it were composed of fine, invisible sand, making every movement a deliberate and thoughtful act. You are now approaching the ancient ruins, the places where the weight of history meets the physical decay of time. This is the era of the crumbling stone, the realization that even our most massive truths can eventually become the much-needed soil for something new. As you walk through these corridors, you see how the mighty structures we once admired are being broken down by the patient work of the elements. It is a moment to consider what remains when the grandeur is gone and all that is left is the raw, unpolished truth of the earth. You think about the nature of ruins, how they are both a testament to past glory and a stark reminder of mortality. A ruin is a story halfway between being a building and being a single, solid stone. You realize that we must learn to find beauty in the brokenness, for it is only through the cracks that the true history can be understood. The crumbling walls are not just falling apart. They are revealing the secrets they were built to hide. As you walk, you see how the stones have been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, their sharp edges softened into something almost organic. This is a metaphor for how truth behaves over time. It begins as something jagged and difficult, but as we live with it, it becomes a smooth, familiar part of our reality. You realize that there was nothing wrong with the sharpness of the initial discovery. It was simply the process of being polished by the passage of time. You consider how much of human endeavor is spent trying to prevent this decay, to fight against the inevitable erosion of our legacies and ourselves. We build massive monuments to defy the end, yet we are essentially just building more elaborate ruins for future generations to study. This realization brings a sense of peace. If all things eventually become ruin, then the pressure to be permanent is actually an illusion. The truth is not in the permanence, but in the process of becoming and dissolving. The thought of decay as a creative force is a profound shift in your perspective. You realize that when something crumbles, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of the landscape, feeding the new life that grows in its wake. The ruins are not an ending, but a fertile ground for the truth to manifest anew. This makes you look at the decaying structures around you with a sense of wonder rather than sorrow. You think about how we often fear the end of our own eras, the moment when our lives or our certainties begin to crumble. We cling to the intact stone as if it were the only thing that matters. But you realize that there's much more life in a ruin than in a perfect, static monument. A ruin has space for light to enter. It has crevices where moss and flowers can take root. The truth is often found in the cracks of the brokenness. As you gaze at a great arched window that now stands without its glass, the wind whistles through the opening like an old, familiar song. You realize that there was a certain necessity to the loss. Without the empty space, we could never have seen the vastness of the sky or felt the breadth of the world. The lack of a solid structure allows for a connection with the infinite that a perfect wall would deny us. This is the beauty of the ruin, the invitation to look through the gaps. You consider how much of our history was written by people who were trying to build something that could never fall. They wanted their names and their deeds to be eternal, yet they forgot that even stone eventually turns back into dust. This realization makes you look at the great kings and queens with a more humanized eye. They were simply architects of an impossible permanence. The truth is far more interesting than the dream of eternity. The sense of history as a cycle of building and crumbling becomes a constant companion in your thoughts. You realize that we are not just living through one era, but within a continuous process of creation and decay. This understanding makes you less afraid of the inevitable shifts in our own lives. If we know that every structure has its time to crumble, we can learn to build with a sense of grace and an eye toward the eventualizing return to the earth. You think about how much we use our memories as a way to preserve ourselves from decay. We hold on to the past like it is a solid wall to lean against, but the walls are always moving. You realize that memory is a living thing, much like the ruins themselves, constantly being shaped by the winds of our present understanding. To truly understand history, we must accept its fluid and shifting nature. As you walk through a particularly narrow part of the ruin, where the stones are stacked in ancient, precarious piles, you realize how delicate the balance of life is. A single movement could cause a collapse, yet there is an incredible strength in the way these fragments hold one another up. This is the truth of human connection. We are often held together by our shared frailty and our mutual need for support. The ruins are not just individual stones. They are an interlocking web of history. You consider how much of the beauty of a ruin comes from the interplay between the stone and the light. When a building is whole, it might block the sun. But when it breaks, the light can penetrate deep into its heart. This realization makes you see the broken parts of our own lives as places where we can finally be illuminated. The truth is often much brighter than the solid wall we thought we needed for shade. The thought of the lightness of the void becomes a source of strength. You realize that while the stone is heavy, the space within it is light and free. To live with the truth is to find a balance between the weight of our physical existence and the lightness of our spirit. We are both the solid stone and the open window. This is the paradox of being human. We must be grounded enough to exist, but open enough to let the truth flow through us. As you approach the next threshold, you feel a sense of readiness to face even more profound revelations. The ruins have prepared you for this. They have taught you how to see the beauty in the broken and the permanence in the ephemeral. You are no longer just an observer. You are a part of the history that is unfolding. You take a breath, feeling the cool air move through the ancient stones around you. The journey continues, moving from the ruins toward the final realization of how to live within the truth. The nothingness is not empty. It is full of possibility. The air becomes even more clear, almost as if you are stepping out of a thick fog into the brilliant, sharp light of an early morning sun. You have reached the phase of the journey where we begin the alchemy of reality, the process of turning the heavy, unvarnished truths into something that can nourish and sustain our souls. The ruins are no longer just symbols of decay. They have become a source of wisdom, a wellspring from which we can draw strength to build anew. This is not about escaping the truth or making it pretty. It is about finding the golden essence within the grit, much like an alchemist seeks gold in common lead. You think about how the most profound transformations happen when we stop trying to change the world and start learning how to work with its inherent truths. The heavy metals of our lives, our fears, our mortalities, are the base materials for a much more precious kind to exist. You realize that the goal is not to turn truth into something else, but to transform ourselves through the process of understanding it. This is the true alchemy, the transmutation of human experience into wisdom. As you walk through this luminous space, you see how the light catches the edges of the ancient stones, making them glow with a soft inner fire. This is the beauty of truth when it is integrated into our lives. It doesn't just reveal what was hidden, but it illuminates the very essence of existence itself. You realize that while the truth can be heavy, it can also be radiant. It provides a different kind of light, one that does not blind us with grandeur, but clarifies everything we see. You consider how much human history has been an attempt to perform this alchemy, to take the hard realities of life and turn them into a legacy of greatness. We want our struggles to be more than just survival. We want them to be meaningful, to have some transformative power. This is why we tell stories, to find the golden thread in the dark fabric of our existence. The history you are uncovering is the record of humanity's eternal search for meaning within the material world. The thought of meaning as a chemical process makes you smile slightly at your own growing understanding. We are not just observers. we are the catalysts themselves. When we approach a truth with an open heart, we change its effect on us, and in doing so, we change how it affects the world around us. This is the power of the seeker, to take the raw data of reality and refine it into a life well lived. As you move through the space, you feel your own spirit becoming more buoyant, even as the physical weight of the truth remains. It is as if the wisdom gained from understanding the weight has made you lighter in your own soul. You realize that to carry a heavy truth requires a certain kind of lightness, grace that allows us to move through the world without being bogged too much by our own seriousness. This is the balance between the gravity and the light. You think about how many people have failed at this alchemy because they were too afraid to touch the base metals. They wanted a shortcut to the gold, trying to build their lives on nothing but the illusions of glory without doing the hard work of understanding reality. You realize that you cannot create something truly lasting until you have embraced the weight of the truth as your starting point. The heavy elements are not an obstacle. They are the very fuel for our transformation. The light in this hall is so clear that every texture, the rough stone, the smooth wood, the fine dust is visible with perfect clarity. This is the clarity of a life lived without the veils of deception. It is a sharp, bright reality that can be intimidating to those who prefer the soft shadows, but it is also incredibly refreshing. You realize that while we may miss the warmth of the old lies, the sharpness of the truth provides a much more vivid and meaningful experience of being alive. You consider how much our onus is defined by the truths we have integrated into our character. A person who has done nothing but live in the light of their own illusions remains one-dimensional. They lack the depth that comes from confronting the heavy truths of existence. You realize that our struggles and our scars are what give us our unique texture, making us more than just a smooth, featureless surface. The truth is what makes us three-dimensional. As you walk, you feel as though you are being refined by the very air around you. The journey has become an internal process of shedding the unnecessary and keeping only what is essential. This is the essence of alchemy, the removal of the dross to reveal the pure substance within. You realize that we must constantly prune our own lives, removing the false narratives so that our true selves can shine more brightly. The thought of dross makes you think of all the trivialities and vanities we once held dear, the small lies about ourselves and others that we used to bolster our egos. They were not evil. They were just unnecessary weight. In the light of truth, these things seem almost comical in their insignificance. You realize that as we grow into wisdom, we naturally let go of the need for such trivialities, making room for more substantial concerns. You think about how much history is actually a collection of people trying to find this sense of meaning. The great movements and the great thinkers were all attempting to solve the same human problem: how to live an authentic life in a world that is often indifferent to our desires. This realization makes you feel a deep connection to the vast lineage of seekers who have walked before you. You are not alone in your pursuit. You are part of a grand, continuous endeavor. As you approach the next threshold, the light seems to intensify, becoming almost too bright for the eyes to bear. It is as if you are approaching a moment where the distinction between the physical and the spiritual begins to blur once more, but this time with a purpose. You are moving toward the final integration of your journey, the realization that truth is not something we find. It is something we become. You take a deep breath, letting the pure, clear light fill your senses. The heavy elements are now working in harmony with the lightness of your spirit, creating a sense of balance that was never possible in the era of the lie. You prepare yourself to step into the final phase of your transformation, the walk toward our own reality. The light you are walking through is no longer a blinding glare. It has become a steady, pervasive glow that illuminates every corner of your perception without overwhelming the senses. You have reached the stage of the walk, the long, steady path where we must learn how to live within the truth on a daily basis. This is not a moment of sudden revelation, but an era of sustained integrity. The weight is still there, and the truths are still sharp, but you have developed a sense of rhythm and grace in carrying them. You are learning to walk the honest path, where every step is a conscious engagement with reality. You think about how much of our lives we spend walking on the smooth paths, the easy ways that require little thought or effort. We often choose the easiest route through life, avoiding the rugged terrain of truth in favor of the well-paved roads of social expectation and comfortable deception. But you realize that while the smooth paths are easier to walk, they rarely lead us where we truly need to go. It is on the uneven, difficult paths of truth that our character is forged and our true direction is found. As you move through this luminous landscape, you see how the ruggedness of the terrain actually provides a more interesting and meaningful path for your journey. The rocks, the slopes, and the sudden changes in elevation are not obstacles to be avoided. They are the features that define the walk. You realize that an honest life is often a difficult one, but it is also much more vital and real than the easy life of the lie. This is the joy of the path, the satisfaction of walking on ground that actually holds something of substance. You consider how many people spend their entire lives searching for a perfect path, not realizing that perfection is an illusion that keeps them from truly moving. They wait for the road to become easy before they begin their real work, but life does not work that way. You realize that we must learn to walk while the truth is still being revealed, making our progress with the tools and the understanding we have at hand. The path is made by walking it. The thought of walking brings a sense of movement into your stillness. Even as you reflect, you are moving forward. Even in the quietest moments, there is an active engagement with reality. You realize that being an honest person is not a static state, but a continuous action, a constant series of small decisions to choose the truth over the easy lie. This is why we must stay vigilant. The path can shift at any moment if we stop paying attention to our footing. As you observe the textures around you, you see how much of the human experience is about balance and rhythm. We are not meant to be purely in the light or purely in the darkness. We need both for a complete life. You realize that the walking is an act of finding our own unique cadence, a way to move through the world that honors the truth without losing ourselves in its intensity. This is the grace of the honest path. It is not about speed, but about the integrity of the step. You think about how much we use our sense of direction to define our purpose. In the past, your direction was given to you by the grand narratives and the glorious myths. Now, your direction must be found within the reality of your own steps. This is a more personal and demanding task, but it is also far more liberating. You are no longer following someone else's map. You are making your own, based on the actual landscape before you. The sense of being an explorer in our own lives becomes much stronger here. The ruggedness of reality can be intimidating, but there is a thrill in the discovery of what lies around the next bend or over the next ridge. You realize that the truth is not just something to be understood. It is something to be experienced through the movement of our existence. We do not just know the truth. We walk with it. You consider how many people might feel lost when they leave the easy, well-lit paths of their youth. They may feel as though they have wandered into a wilderness without guidance. But you realize that this wilderness is actually the most authentic environment for human growth. The lack of a paved road means we must use our own strength and wisdom to navigate, making us more resilient and capable than those who stay on the easy tracks. The thought of the path reminds you that every step has its own consequence. If we take an easy step based on a lie, we might find ourselves off course before we know it. This is why integrity is so vital and acts as our internal compass, ensuring that each step is aligned with the truth of where we are and where we are going. You realize that being honest is not just a moral choice. It is a navigational necessity for the soul. As you walk through the luminous terrain, you notice how the light seems to follow your movements, illuminating the path as you go. This is a beautiful thought, that when we live with integrity, the truth provides its own guidance. We do not need to see everything at once. We only need enough light for the next step. The clarity of our purpose becomes more apparent even in the most challenging parts of the terrain. You think about how much our relationship with time is affected by our walking. Those who live in the lie are always rushing toward a future that doesn't exist or clinging to a past that was never there. But those who walk the honest path live in the present, for they must be aware of where their feet are touching the ground right now. This makes you realize that the truth is ultimately a tool for being more fully alive in the current moment. The thought of the current moment brings a sense of peace to your mind. It is the only place where we can truly encounter reality. The legends were about the past and the future. The walk is about the now. You realize that as you move forward, you are not just traveling through history, but through the very essence of existence itself. This is the purpose of our journey, to be fully present within the truth of our own time. As you approach the final segment of your journey, the path seems to open up into a vast, clear expanse. You feel more certain than ever that this was the necessary direction for your soul. The ruggedness of the terrain has not been an obstacle. It has been the very thing that shaped your strength. You take one last deep breath and prepare yourself for the final, most beautiful realization. The end of the walk is where we truly begin to arrive. The expanse before you is vast, clear, and illuminated by a light so pure, it seems to transcend the very idea of visibility. You have arrived at the end of the long, winding walk, the final realization of how to live within the truth. The rugged terrain has smoothed into an infinite horizon, where there are no more secrets to hide and no more shadows to fear. This is not a destination in the sense of a stopping point. It is the moment of complete integration, where the history we have traveled through becomes one with the soul that experienced it. You are standing at the end of the journey, looking back at the path you have carved with your own footsteps. You think about how the nothingness we once feared was actually the most profound presence of all. When we stripped away the gold and the legends, when we left behind the easy paths and the heavy illusions, we found ourselves in a vast, open space that is neither empty nor overwhelming. It is simply the truth, the pure, unadmitted reality of existence. This is the finality of our journey, the realization that the goal was never to arrive somewhere else, but to become someone who can exist perfectly within the absolute clarity of being. As you gaze out at the horizon, you see how the entire history of your journey has been a preparation for this moment of stillness. The hard lessons, the beautiful lies, and the heavy truths were all necessary components of this final piece. You realize that there was nothing to be gained from the legend because everything we needed was already in the truth. This is the ultimate paradox. We traveled so far just to find what was always here, waiting for us to be still enough to see it. You consider how much of our human struggle was a misunderstood attempt to reach the state of being. We thought we needed more, but in reality, we needed less noise, less ego, and fewer illusions. The truth is not something to be accumulated. It is something to be allowed into the empty spaces of our lives. You realize that the end of the walk is not about reaching a destination, but about arriving at a state of perfect, quiet clarity. The silence here is no longer an empty void or a heavy pressure. It is a harmonious, vibrant peace. It is the sound of a soul that has finally found its true home within itself. This is the finality of our journey, the realization that we are at once the wanderer and the destination. We are the travelers through history, and the very truth that we were seeking all along. The nothingness is not empty. It is full of the sheer, beautiful presence of reality. You think about how much the beauty of our lives was enhanced by the struggle to find this peace. Without the darkness of the shadows or the weight of the lies, would we have known the true value of the light? You realize that every moment of doubt and every heavy step was a necessary seasoning for the soul. The history of our journey is what makes this final rest so sweet. It gives us the context to truly appreciate the clarity we have found. As you stand at the end, the vastness before you seems to pulse with a quiet, joyous energy. It is as if the entire universe is breathing in unison with your own heart. You realize that when we live entirely within the truth, our individual existence begins to merge with the great rhythm of all things. This is not the loss of self, but the expansion of the self into the infinite. The lie was a wall. The truth is an endless horizon. You consider how many people will continue the walk, seeking this same peace through their own struggles and discoveries. They are the next generation of seekers, and they too will find that the nothingness is the most fertile ground for new life. You realize that our journey is a relay, a passing of the flame from one soul to another as we navigate the unfoldings of existence. This is the true immortality, not being remembered in legend, but being part of the living truth. The lightness you feel now is the perfect counterpart to the heaviness you once carried. It is a buoyancy that comes from having nothing left to hide and no more illusions to maintain. You realize that we do not need to be heavy to have substance. We can be light, clear, and profoundly real all at once. This is the goal of the alchemy, a perfect balance between the earthly weight and the celestial lightness. You think about how much of our human history was spent trying to escape this silence by making it into a grand drama. We were so afraid of the quiet that we filled the world with noise, yet the silence is where we find ourselves. You realize that the peace you feel now is the reward for having the courage to be still and let the noise fade away. The truth does not need a soundtrack. It only needs our presence. As you prepare to transition from this journey into the rest of your life, you feel a sense of completeness. You are no longer looking for something else because you have found that everything is enough. This is the ultimate realization. We were always complete, even when we were lost in the lies. The truth did not change our reality. It simply allowed us to finally inhabit it fully. The nothingness before you becomes a canvas of pure potentiality. It is the space where all things begin and end, and there is no fear in its vastness, because you are now one with its truth. You realize that your journey has been a beautiful circle, from the unknown into the known, and finally back to a much more profound and enlightened version of the unknown. You think about how many people will look at our lives as a mystery, not knowing the clarity we have found in the silence. We will leave behind nothing but our presence, which is the greatest legacy anyone can offer. This realization makes you smile with a quiet, inward joy. The journey was always worth it. Every step, every breath, and every truth was a vital part of this beautiful unfolding. The light begins to gently envelop you, drawing you into a state of pure, unadulterable being. You are no longer the traveler or the history seeker. You are simply life itself, experiencing its own magnificent truth. The nothingness is not an end, but a homecoming. You prepare yourself for the final, most beautiful rest, the peace of a soul that has finally come home to reality. As the light becomes all there is, you realize that the lie was never our enemy. It was merely our training ground. And the truth was never our judge. It was always our liberation. You close your eyes in spirit and let go of everything else, settling into the perfect, quiet rhythm of the true reality. And so, as the candles flicker low and the shadows of history settle into their rightful places, you find yourself drifting in that beautiful, clear space between the truth and the dream. The stories we have told, the grand kings, the golden myths, and the heavy, dusty truths all merge into a single soothing hum of existence. You are no longer walking, you are simply being. Let the weight of your own life settle gently around you like a soft velvet blanket. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to hide. The world is vast, but you are safe in the quiet truth of this moment. The stars are watching over your rest, and the earth is cradling your spirit as it settles into the deep, restorative sleep of the wise. Let every breath you take be an act of surrender, a gentle letting go of the day's illusions, and a welcoming of the night's profound reality. You have done enough. You have seen enough. You have been enough. Sleep now, dear traveler, as the silence becomes your companion and the truth becomes your rest. The history of the world continues to turn, but for you, everything is perfectly still. Let the darkness be kind, let the light be gentle, and let your soul find its peace in the beautiful, unvarnished truth of the night. The end, sweet dreams.